Michael Thompson flashed that trademark grin at his lawyer as the divorce papers were signed, completely oblivious to what was coming. "Time to collect my share of the family fortune," he announced, his voice booming loud enough for half the courtroom to hear. His attorney actually laughed with him, a smug, shared chuckle like they were partners in some private joke, already spending the money. They looked like wolves who had just cornered their prey, and they were savoring the moment before the kill. Michael leaned back in his chair, adjusting the knot of his silk tie. He winked at my daughter, Sarah, who sat pale and trembling, looking at the floor. That wink, that casual, arrogant, "I own you" gesture, it was the last mistake he would ever make. That's when I stood up from the gallery. My sensible heels clicked against the marble floor, a steady, methodical sound. Every step was a countdown. Click, click, click. The rhythm of inevitability. I'm Eleanor Whitman. I'm 67 years old, and I've been waiting 4 years for this exact moment. Your Honor? My voice was steady, cutting through the smug silence. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The judge looked up, annoyed at the interruption. Michael's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Ma'am, this is a private proceeding. The gallery is to remain silent." "I am the mother of the petitioner, Your Honor," I said, walking directly toward the judge's bench. "Eleanor Whitman, and I have evidence that is material to any financial arrangements being finalized today." Michael's lawyer stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular. Mrs. Whitman is not party to this divorce. She has no standing." "I have standing as the victim of a felony," I said, stopping before the bailiff. "A felony committed by Mr. Thompson in direct relation to these proceedings." The courtroom went silent. Michael's face, which had been so confident, flickered with the first shadow of doubt. His lawyer stopped laughing. "Your Honor," I said, holding up a simple manila envelope, "while Michael thought he was about to cash in on my family's hard-earned wealth, I was about to cash in on something far more valuable: justice." "Bailiff, please retrieve the envelope from Mrs. Whitman," the judge ordered, his voice now sharp with interest. I handed the envelope to the bailiff. "Before any financial arrangements are finalized, I believe you need to examine the date on Mr. Thompson's signature." The judge opened the envelope and studied the contents for what felt like an eternity. I could see Michael shifting uncomfortably in his chair, finally sensing that the ground was crumbling beneath him. He whispered something to his lawyer, who was now shuffling frantically through his own papers, clearly blindsided. "Mr. Thompson," the judge said finally, his voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. "This appears to be your signature on a power of attorney document, granting you full control over Mrs. Whitman's financial accounts. It is dated 2 weeks ago." "That's correct, Your Honor," Michael said, attempting to regain his composure. "Eleanor and I discussed it. She felt I was in a better position to manage her assets on behalf of the family." "That's very interesting," the judge said, pulling another document from my envelope. "Because according to these airline tickets, passport stamps, and hotel receipts, Mrs. Whitman was in London visiting her sister during that entire week." The color drained from Michael's face faster than water down a drain. Sarah, my dear daughter, looked up, her eyes wide with confused, dawning hope. "Furthermore," the judge continued, his voice rising in anger, "this represents identity theft and fraud. The forged signature, attempting to access Mrs. Whitman's financial accounts, constitutes elder financial abuse. Both are felony charges." The judge looked up from the documents, his expression one of pure disgust. He had no patience for con artists. "Bailiff," he commanded, "arrest this man." The satisfaction I felt watching those handcuffs click around Michael's wrists was better than any lottery win. After 4 years of watching him manipulate my daughter and scheme to get his hands on money he never earned, seeing his master plan crumble into criminal charges was absolutely delicious. Sarah rushed to my side as Michael was led away, his charm vanishing, replaced by the desperate protests of a cornered rat. "Sarah, you can't let them do this. It's a misunderstanding. Your mother is lying." But here's what Michael didn't know about me. I hadn't just stumbled onto his latest scheme. I'd been building a case against him for 4 years, brick by methodical brick. This divorce hearing wasn't the end of his story. It was exactly where I'd planned for it to end all along. Let me take you back to how this whole mess started. Because Michael Thompson didn't just wander into our lives by accident. No, that man targeted my family with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, and I was the only one who saw it coming from day one. 4 years ago, I was working part-time as a bookkeeper for Morrison & Associates, just a small firm handling accounts for local businesses. It kept my mind sharp after my husband Robert passed away. One Tuesday, a charming young man in an expensive suit walked into our office. He claimed he needed help with complex family estate planning. Red flags should have been waving like surrender banners. But my colleague Janet was immediately smitten with his smooth talk and designer cologne. "He's so refined, Eleanor," she whispered to me after showing him into the conference room. "And so young to be so successful." "Success and youth are a volatile combination, Janet," I'd murmured, already pulling up the client intake form. Let's see what he really wants. Michael was 32 then, handsome in that polished, predatory way that screams, "Too good to be true." He had this gift for making everyone feel like they were the most important person in the room. He claimed to work in high-level financial consulting, helping families protect their assets. The irony of that statement would become crystal clear later. I sat in on the consultation, taking notes. He worked the room, complimenting Janet on her efficiency and me on the firm's reputation. But his questions were all wrong. They weren't the questions of someone looking to create an estate plan. They were the questions of someone looking to defeat one. "I'm most concerned with asset protection strategies," he said, leaning forward with that earnest, fake sincerity. "Specifically, how does one structure a trust to be flexible?" "Flexible, Mr. Thompson?" I asked, my pen pausing over the notepad. "Yes, in case of emergency. What are the legal protections against, say, elder financial abuse?" He laughed it off. "My own grandmother was nearly taken in by a scammer last year. I'm just very sensitive to the issue." My blood ran cold. He wasn't asking how to protect someone. He was asking what the loopholes were. He then directed his attention to me. "Eleanor," he said after the meeting, "I'd love to discuss some investment opportunities with you sometime, perhaps over coffee." I was 63, recently widowed, and admittedly flattered by the attention. But something about his smile reminded me of a door-to-door salesman who wouldn't take no for an answer. "Thank you, Michael, but I must decline," I said politely. I maintain strict professional boundaries with clients. Of course," he said, not looking the least bit deterred. "A true professional. I admire that." He was persistent. 2 days later, he coincidentally showed up at the coffee shop where I grabbed my morning latte. "Eleanor, what a surprise! Fancy meeting you here." His chance encounter stories became a pattern, and his questions became more personal. "I'm really looking to settle down," he mentioned casually one morning, stirring his black coffee. "Find a nice family to become a part of, maybe someone with children who could use a stable male figure in their lives." That's when I realized he'd been researching me. He knew I had a daughter, Sarah. He knew she was 33, recently divorced, and struggling as a single mother to my 2 grandchildren, 10-year-old Jake and 8-year-old Emma. He knew her first husband had left her for someone younger and barely paid child support. He knew Sarah was exhausted, working double shifts as a nurse to keep her head above water, trying to be both parents. He knew about my late husband's pension and the modest property investments I'd made over the years. And most disturbing of all, he knew I was the type of mother who would do anything to see her child happy and secure. I went home that day and installed a new high-security lock on my home office. It was the first brick in my fortress. The next phase of his plan was sickeningly brilliant. He stopped running into me. He started volunteering. Specifically, he began volunteering at the community center where Sarah brought Jake and Emma for after-school programs. I knew exactly what he was doing. Within 6 months, he was Sarah's knight in shining armor. He was helping with carpools. He was checking homework. He was at their dinner table, charming my grandchildren and listening patiently to my daughter's frustrations. "Mom, he's incredible," Sarah gushed to me over the phone. "He's so good with the kids, and he's just so stable. After everything with Mark, I can't believe I found someone like him." "He does seem wonderful, dear," I said, my voice carefully neutral. All the while, he was managing to learn everything about our family's financial situation. He helped Sarah organize her bills. He offered advice on her budget. He was the perfect supportive partner. Sarah thought she'd found her perfect match. I knew she'd found her perfect predator. But Michael made one crucial mistake in all his careful planning. He underestimated the protective instincts of a mother who'd spent decades balancing books and spotting discrepancies for small businesses. I knew a con artist when I saw one. He was planning his downfall before he even proposed to my daughter. The first time Michael brought Sarah to my house for Sunday dinner, I made my famous pot roast and watched him work his magic. He complimented my cooking. He admired my garden. He played board games with Jake and Emma like he was auditioning for Father of the Year. Sarah glowed with a happiness I hadn't seen in years. He even held her hand during grace and helped clear the dishes without being asked. To anyone watching, he was the perfect gentleman. Except I was watching very carefully, and perfect gentlemen make me nervous. While Sarah was in the kitchen helping me serve dessert, Michael excused himself. "May I use your bathroom, Eleanor?" "Of course, dear. Down the hall to the left," I said. Normal enough. Except the bathroom was down the hall to the left, and I watched his reflection in the china cabinet glass as he disappeared into my home office on the right, the office where I kept my financial records. I picked up the dessert plates and followed him, my footsteps silent on the carpet runner. I stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds just watching. He didn't hear me. He was too busy. I found him with his phone out, rapidly photographing my bank statements and investment reports, which I had, stupidly, left in my desk organizer. "Michael," I said from the doorway. I kept my voice as sweet as honey. "Did you get lost?" He jumped like I'd caught him stealing the silver, fumbling to hide his phone in his pocket. "Oh, Eleanor, yes, I just... This is a lovely room, very organized." He gestured vaguely at my filing cabinets, as if he'd just been admiring my organizational skills. "Thank you," I said, walking slowly into the room. "I find good record-keeping is absolutely essential." I picked up the very bank statement he had been photographing, especially for protecting one's assets. I emphasized the word protecting just enough. His eyes met mine, and for a split second the charming mask slipped. I saw the cold, calculating predator underneath. He knew that I knew, but he didn't think it mattered. He thought I was just an old woman. "The bathroom is just down the hall, dear," I said, smiling warmly. "To the left." That night, after he drove Sarah and the kids home, I sat in that same office and made a decision. If Michael Thompson thought he could charm his way into our bank accounts, he was about to learn that this grandmother had been protecting assets since before he learned to lie convincingly. The next morning, at 9 a.m. sharp, I was in the office of my attorney, Richard Caldwell. Richard had handled my family's legal affairs since Robert's death, and he was as sharp as a tack and twice as tough. "Richard," I said, forgoing the pleasantries, "I need to create comprehensive asset protection structures, and I need them to be completely bulletproof against fraud and manipulation." Richard leaned back, taking off his glasses. "Eleanor? What's going on? This seems sudden." "Let's just say I have concerns about a potential predator circling my family," I replied, "and I want to make sure my daughter and grandchildren are protected, no matter what happens to me." Richard worked for 2 solid weeks. He didn't just create a trust, he created a legal fortress. a complex web of irrevocable trusts, multiple signature account structures, and automated fraud protection measures. Every major financial decision, any change over $500, required approval from both Richard and my longtime bank manager, Mr. Henderson, who'd known me for 15 years. Most importantly, Richard included specific clauses requiring in-person biometric verification for any changes to power of attorney or trust modifications. Any attempt to forge signatures or use a non-verified notary would automatically trigger fraud alerts and freeze every single account until a full legal review could be completed. "This is extremely thorough, Eleanor," Richard said when we finished. "It's ironclad, but are you sure you want this level of protection? It makes everything more complicated, even for legitimate changes." "Richard," I said, signing the final document, "some things are worth the complication." 3 months later, Sarah announced her engagement to Michael. He'd proposed during a romantic weekend getaway, presenting her with a ring that cost more than she made in 3 months. When I asked, gently, how he could afford such an expensive ring on his consultant's income, Sarah got defensive. "Mom, please don't be negative. He's wonderful. Can't you just be happy for me?" I backed off. "Of course, sweetheart. It's beautiful." The wedding was beautiful. I'll give him that. He spared no expense on flowers, catering, and a photographer who captured every moment of what Sarah believed was her fairy tale. I smiled through the ceremony. I danced at the reception. I welcomed my new son-in-law into the family with a warm embrace. But that night, I went home and started a new detailed file. I labeled it Michael Thompson. Inside, I placed my notes from our first meeting, the date I'd caught him in my office, and a copy of the wedding invitation. I had a feeling I was going to need every piece of evidence I could gather. For the first 2 years of their marriage, I almost convinced myself I'd been wrong. He seemed genuinely devoted to Sarah. He treated Jake and Emma like his own children. He maintained steady employment, contributed to household expenses, and appeared to be the perfect responsible family man. Almost. But a leopard doesn't change its spots. It just learns to hide them better. The first crack in his perfect husband facade appeared during Christmas dinner in year 3. Sarah had invited me over for what she called a family financial planning discussion. The tone in her voice suggested it was more of an intervention. Michael sat at the head of their dining table like a patriarch, a thick folder of documents spread before him. He started with a voice dripping in fake concern. "Eleanor, we've been talking, and we're a little worried. We think you might benefit from some professional guidance with your investment portfolio." "Sarah mentioned you've been handling everything yourself since Robert passed," he continued. "And at your age, that's a lot of responsibility for someone managing substantial assets alone." I sipped my eggnog and waited. This was the pitch. "Michael has some wonderful connections in the industry, Mom," Sarah added enthusiastically. "He could help you restructure things, maybe get better returns, and create a more secure estate plan for the family." "How thoughtful," I replied. "And what would this restructuring involve exactly?" Michael leaned forward, smelling the commission. "Well, for starters, we'd want to consolidate your various accounts. Transfer everything to a single firm where I have professional relationships. We could also modernize your estate planning documents. Some of those trust structures Richard created are unnecessarily complicated for today's financial environment." There it was. After 3 years of playing the devoted son-in-law, he was finally making his move. He wanted to simplify the very fraud-resistant documents Richard had designed. "That's quite generous of you to offer," I said, maintaining my sweet grandmother voice while my accountant brain ran the calculations. "But I'm quite satisfied with my current arrangements. Richard has been handling my affairs for years, and I trust his judgment completely." Michael's smile tightened. "Of course. And I'm sure Richard is wonderful for basic needs. But Eleanor, these are assets that could be performing much better. Don't you want to maximize what you're leaving for Sarah and the grandchildren?" The guilt trip. A classic manipulation technique. Make the victim feel selfish for protecting themselves. I'd seen this exact approach in the elder fraud prevention seminars I'd started attending. I appreciate your concern for my family's future, I said, setting down my glass with deliberate precision. But I'm curious, Michael. How do you know so much about my asset levels? I don't recall sharing my specific portfolio details with anyone. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we weren't trying to pry, it's just... Michael has experience with this, and when I mentioned some of the financial discussions we've had... What financial discussions? I interrupted, my grandmother mask slipping slightly. I don't recall having detailed conversations about my investment portfolio with you, Sarah. The silence was heavy. Michael's face had gone carefully neutral, the calculation behind his eyes visible. Sarah looked embarrassed. I may have noticed some paperwork when I was helping you organize last spring, she said weakly. Paperwork about what, specifically? I kept my voice gentle, because I don't recall needing help with any financial organizing recently. Michael cleared his throat, taking control. Eleanor, I think there's a misunderstanding. Sarah and I are just trying to look out for your best interests as you get older. We're family, after all. Family. The word manipulators always use when they want something they haven't earned. I went home that night and called Richard first thing Monday morning. Richard, I said, it's time. Add the additional security measures. He's making his move. 2 days after that Christmas dinner, I did something I'd never imagined doing. I hired a private investigator. Protecting my family now required knowing exactly what kind of monster had married into it. Patricia Morgan came highly recommended by Richard's law firm. She specialized in background investigations and financial fraud. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd spent 15 years in law enforcement, and she had the sharpest eyes I'd ever seen. What exactly are you looking for, Mrs. Whitman? She asked during our first meeting in her stark downtown office. The truth about Michael Thompson, I replied, sliding my file across the desk. I have strong suspicions about his intentions. I need facts. Patricia's preliminary report arrived 10 days later. I read it in my kitchen, and I felt sick. It was worse than even my suspicious mind had imagined. Michael Thompson wasn't just a gold digger. He was a calculated serial fraud artist. His employment history was a masterpiece of lies. The financial consulting consisted of short-term jobs at various firms, all ending when supervisors discovered discrepancies or policy violations related to client confidentiality. He'd been fired from 3 different companies. More disturbing was his relationship history. Patricia found 2 previous serious relationships with single mothers who had family money. Both ended badly, with the women reporting suspicious financial activity and missing documents. The first, Catherine Mills from Ohio, had dated him for 8 months. During that time, her identity was stolen, her savings account was emptied, and her credit cards were maxed out. The theft occurred 2 weeks after she gave Michael a key to her apartment. The second, Janet Rodriguez from Kentucky, had been engaged to him for 6 months. She discovered he'd been using her personal information to apply for loans in her name. By the time she found out, Michael had disappeared, leaving her with over $40,000 in debt. Mrs. Whitman, Patricia said when she called to discuss the report, this man follows a consistent pattern. He targets women, builds trust, gains access, and then executes the fraud. The fact he's been married to your daughter for 3 years suggests she's his biggest target yet. Patricia came to my house to deliver the full report. She laid out the documents on my dining room table. His methods are methodical, Patricia explained, pointing to a timeline. Both previous victims reported he showed unusual interest in their family financial arrangements and estate planning. He volunteered to help with paperwork. He offered financial advice. He positions himself as the trustworthy expert. That's exactly what he did at Christmas, I said, my hands clenched. He tried to get me to modernize my trusts, which you, wisely, had already locked down. Patricia said with a nod of approval. "He hit a wall with you, so he's been biding his time. But the most chilling part is this." She pointed to a section on information gathering. "He's not just a charmer, Eleanor. He's a data miner. Both victims reported him asking casual questions about their mothers, their inheritances, their family dynamics. He was building a complete profile." "He was studying our family for years," I whispered, the full scope of his deception settling on me. "He didn't just fall in love with Sarah. He targeted her. He used her vulnerability and my grandchildren to get into our lives." "Yes," Patricia said grimly, "and he's been planning his approach to your assets ever since." I sat there staring at the evidence. The man who ate my pot roast, the man who played catch with my grandson, all of it, a lie, a performance. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice low and furious. "If I show this to Sarah, she'll be devastated. She might not even believe it. He has her completely manipulated." "Confronting him directly is a bad idea," Patricia agreed. "He'll just disappear, cover his tracks, and Sarah will blame you for driving him away. He'll paint you as the paranoid, interfering mother-in-law." "And he'll be back," I said. "He won't give up on a score this big. He'll just find another way." "Exactly. So we don't confront him. We let him make his next move. We let him walk straight into the trap you've already built." A cold, hard resolve settled in my chest. "All right. I'm not just going to let him make a move, Patricia. I'm going to make sure he destroys himself in the process." For the next 2 months, Patricia and I worked in secret. She monitored his financials, his communications, his digital footprint. I pretended to be the slightly aloof but accepting grandmother. Then Patricia called me, her voice tight with confusion. "Eleanor, I found something, and you're not going to like it." "Spit it out, Patricia." "I've uncovered a sophisticated digital trail, encrypted emails, posts on dark web forums, all pointing to Michael." "Good," I said. "That's what we want." "No, you don't understand," she said impatiently. "The trail doesn't paint him as a predator. It paints him as a victim. The emails, which he's been sending to an encrypted address, detail how he's being blackmailed by an identity theft ring. The forum posts are him, under a pseudonym, asking for help, saying they forced him to cultivate relationships to gain financial data." I sat down. He planted it. It's a false trail." "I don't think so, Eleanor," Patricia said, and my heart sank. "This is high-level stuff. Multiple servers, anonymized proxies. It looks legitimate. The language, the technical details, it's all consistent. He's claiming this ring has his personal data, that they've threatened Sarah and the kids. He's framing himself as a man trapped, trying to protect his family." "It's a lie," I insisted, but a seed of doubt had been planted. What if I was wrong? What if this man was in over his head, a pawn in a larger game? "I have to follow this, Eleanor," Patricia said, her voice all business. "My professional integrity demands it. If he's a victim, that changes everything. If he's the kingpin, this trail might lead us to his partners. But I can't ignore it." For the next 3 weeks, we chased shadows. Patricia and I spent hours in her office, mapping out the digital trail. She hired a white hat hacker to try and trace the recipients of Michael's blackmail emails. We wasted time. We wasted resources. Every lead was a dead end. The servers were all ghosted. The crypto wallets he was forced to use were empty. "Patricia, this is a diversion," I insisted, frustration mounting. We were sitting in her car at 2 a.m., staking out a dead-drop location the blackmailers had supposedly used. It was, of course, empty. "The data is solid, Eleanor," she shot back, her own patience wearing thin. "This is what investigators do. We follow the evidence. You hired me for facts, and these are the facts I'm finding. Maybe you just don't like what they're telling you." "What they're telling me is that he's smarter than you think," I retorted. "He knows I'm suspicious. He knew I might hire someone. This entire charade is for us, Patricia. He's playing us. You're letting your emotion cloud your judgment, she said, tapping her fingers on the steering wheel. I'm trusting the data. We'll give it one more week. My gut, the same instinct that had been screaming at me for 4 years, was in open rebellion against the data. He was a con artist, and this was his greatest con yet. I went home that night furious and second-guessing myself. I reread Patricia's initial report. Catherine Mills, Janet Rodriguez. No mention of a blackmailing ring. Just a predator who took their money and disappeared. I called Patricia at 7 a.m. Forget the digital trail, I said. Go back to the physical, the real world. Where did he get the tools to build this digital fortress? Patricia, to her credit, pivoted immediately. She was frustrated, but she was a professional. She stopped looking at where the emails were going and started looking at where they were coming from. It took her 48 hours. She found it. A cash purchase. Not for a high-end server, but for a simple, off-the-shelf burner laptop and a prepaid anonymous internet fob. Purchased from an electronics store in a strip mall 40 miles out of town. She got the surveillance footage. And there he was. My son-in-law, Michael Thompson, in a baseball cap and sunglasses, paying cash for the very tools he used to build his elaborate, "I'm a victim" narrative. You were right, Patricia said on the phone. Her voice was cold, sharp, and all traces of doubt were gone. She was angry. He hadn't just conned me, he'd conned her. The whole thing was a lie, a sophisticated, time-wasting lie. He just wanted to muddy the waters, I said, feeling a grim satisfaction. He did more than that, Patricia said. He's lost. He knows he's being watched. He's desperate. And a desperate con man is a dangerous con man. He's going to make his final move, and he's going to do it soon. The false trail had failed, wasting our time but hardening our resolve. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait for the animal to get hungry enough to step in it. The call came 2 weeks later, not to me, but to Patricia. It was from a blocked number. "Is this Patricia Morgan?" a man's voice asked, muffled. "Who is this?" Patricia replied, instantly signaling to her system to start recording. "That doesn't matter. I'm a former colleague of Michael Thompson, or Michael Patterson, or whatever he's calling himself. I heard you've been digging into his employment history." "I might be," Patricia said, her voice neutral. "Stop digging into the past. Look at what he's doing now. He was bragging about a big score, about cashing out a paranoid old woman's entire estate. He said he finally got the keys to the kingdom." "What keys?" Patricia pressed. "I don't know, but he was at the office late last week using the high-end scanners and printers. Not company business. He was working on some legal documents. He was practicing signatures, over and over. He thought no one was watching." "Why are you telling me this?" Patricia asked. There was a pause. "Let's just say Michael Patterson cost me my career. He framed me for a data breach he committed 2 years ago. I lost my job, my reputation. This isn't about helping you. This is about watching him burn. He's planning to use the documents soon, very soon." The line went dead. Patricia called me immediately. "He's got the documents, the forged power of attorney. Our ally says he was practicing signatures." "He's going to make his move," I said, my heart hammering. "And we'll be ready for him," Patricia replied. "I've already alerted Richard and your bank manager. The accounts are on high alert, locked down. The second he tries to use that forgery, every alarm in the building will go off." "Good," I said. "But I have a better idea. Let's not wait for the alarm. Let's let him think he succeeded." I had a trip planned to visit my sister in London. I'm going to London as planned. I'm going to be 3,000 miles away. Let's see what he does when he thinks the cat is away. I made a very public show of leaving. I had Sarah drive me to the airport. I hugged my grandchildren goodbye and told Michael to take good care of the house. His smile was all teeth. The moment I was gone, he acted. While I was in London, meticulously paying for every scone and cup of tea with my credit card, Michael made his move. He filed the forged power of attorney with my bank, and just as I'd planned, the bank accepted it. Mr. Henderson, my bank manager, called me on a secure line. "He's done it, Eleanor. The documents are in. They're very good forgeries. To the untrained eye, they'd pass." "And you accepted them?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "As you instructed. We've flagged the account, but it appears to him that he has full control. He hasn't tried to move any money yet. He's just looking. Savoring it, I imagine." "Good," I said. "Let him. Let him think he's won. Let him get arrogant. He'll need that confidence for the divorce hearing." For 2 weeks, Michael Thompson believed he was the king of the world. He believed he had my entire life's savings at his fingertips. He just had to wait for the divorce from Sarah to be finalized, and then he would clean me out and disappear. He had no idea that the acceptance was the final snap of the trap, and the steel jaws were now closing around his leg. The forged documents and the bank's official record of him filing them were now logged as evidence. The morning that changed everything started with Sarah calling me at 6 a.m. in my London hotel room. Her voice was shaking with a combination of fury and humiliation. "Mom, you were right. You were right about everything." I sat bolt upright in bed. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "What happened?" "He's been lying to me about everything," she choked out, her voice breaking. "I got suspicious after that horrible Christmas dinner. He started pressuring me about your finances, asking questions about your will, about the trusts. So I did what you would do," she continued, taking a shaky breath. "I hired someone, a private investigator, my own background check on my own husband." "Oh, Sarah." "It's all fake, Mom. His employment records, his references, even his social security number. It belongs to someone who died 5 years ago." I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. She had seen it for herself. That was the only way she would ever have believed it. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "I found his desk drawer unlocked. He's been careless. I found these." She was crying openly now. "Forged power of attorney documents. For your accounts, Mom. He's been planning to steal everything." "I know, dear," I said gently. "I've known for 4 years. He dated them for last week," she whispered, "when I knew you were in London. He's not just a liar, Mom. He's a monster." "I'm flying home today," I said, already packing my bag. "Call Richard. Tell him to meet me at your house. And Sarah, file for divorce. Today, we're ending this." When I arrived at Sarah's house, Richard was already there. We found Sarah at her kitchen table, surrounded by documents. But the trembling, victimized woman was gone. In her place was a woman I hadn't seen in years, my daughter, fierce, determined, and furious. "He's been using stolen identities," she said, pushing a file toward Richard. "He has bank statements showing deposits that don't match his salary, credit card bills for things I've never seen." Richard examined the forged power of attorney. These are sophisticated forgeries, but they have several legal flaws. More importantly, attempting to use them is multiple felonies. Identity theft, attempted fraud, forgery. This is clear intent to commit elder financial abuse. I pulled out my phone and called Patricia. "Bring the files, all of them. Meet us at Sarah's house, now." When Patricia arrived 30 minutes later, we spread her findings across the dining room table. The reports on Catherine Mills and Janet Rodriguez, the surveillance photos of Michael buying the burner laptop, the records from our unexpected ally. Sarah stared at the evidence of Michael's other victims, her face pale with horror. "Those poor women, and I defended him to you, Mom. I got angry at you for being suspicious." "You wanted to believe in love," I said gently, taking her hand. "There is nothing wrong with that. The problem is that Michael was never offering it honestly." "Good," Sarah said, her voice hard as steel. "I want him prosecuted for everything. For what he did to me, to those other women, to our entire family. That afternoon, we walked into the police station together, a grandmother who'd built a trap, a daughter who'd seen through the lies, and a lawyer with enough evidence to put a career criminal behind bars. Detective Morrison took our statement, his eyes widening as we laid out the files. "Mrs. Whitman," he said, "this is one of the most well-documented fraud cases I've ever seen. Your financial protections prevented any actual loss, but the attempted fraud, the forgeries, we've got more than enough." Michael would have to come home eventually, and when he did, he'd find a very different reception than he was expecting. Michael walked into his house that evening whistling. He was expecting to find Sarah making dinner, the kids doing homework, domestic bliss, masking his con. Instead, he found 3 adults sitting in his living room like a tribunal: me, Sarah, and Richard. The coffee table was covered with his fraudulent life, the forged power of attorney, the background investigation reports, the surveillance photos. The look on his face was priceless, pure, unadulterated panic, followed by the rapid calculation of a man trying to figure out which lie to tell first. "Sarah, honey, what's going on here?" he said, setting down his briefcase. "Why is everyone looking so serious?" "Michael Thompson," I said, my voice sweet as honey but sharp as steel. Or should I say Michael Patterson? It's getting hard to keep track of which identity you're using to commit fraud this week. Sarah stood up, and I'd never been prouder of her backbone. Don't you dare lie to me anymore, Michael. I know about the forged documents. I know about Catherine Mills and Janet Rodriguez, and I know what you tried to do to my mother." His charming facade cracked completely. The warmth vanished, revealing the cold, calculating predator underneath. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sarah. Your mother is a paranoid old woman who's been sabotaging our marriage from day one." "Excuse me," I said, standing up. "I'm paranoid? That's rich. Coming from a man who's been photographing my financial documents and forging my signature. That's not what happened." "Oh, but it is exactly what happened," I continued, savoring the pale, sick look on his face. "Did you really think I didn't notice you snooping through my office during your first visit? Did you think I was just some doting grandmother who wouldn't recognize a con artist when I saw one?" He shifted to aggressive denial. "These are all misunderstandings, paperwork errors. You're making me sound like some kind of criminal over simple mistakes." Richard cleared his throat and held up the plastic-sleeved power of attorney document. "Michael, these aren't paperwork errors. These are felony forgeries. The penalties for elder financial abuse in this state are severe." "My legal situation?" Michael laughed, but it was a desperate barking sound. "What legal situation? You can't prove criminal intent from some disputed signatures." Richard smiled. It was the smile of a chess master announcing checkmate. "Actually, we can prove intent quite easily. You see, Eleanor was in London visiting family when you allegedly witnessed her signing these documents. We have passport stamps, hotel receipts, credit card bills, and restaurant charges proving she was 3,000 miles away from your supposed notary appointment." The reality finally sank in. He looked around the room like a trapped animal, but there was no escape route. "This is all circumstantial," he hissed. "You can't prove I forged anything." "Actually," I said, pulling one more file from my bag, the one from Patricia, "your signature patterns are remarkably consistent across multiple fraud attempts. I've been in touch with Catherine Mills and Janet Rodriguez. They are both very, very interested in pressing charges for what you did to them, too." His composure snapped. "Those women! They knew exactly what they were getting into. They were willing participants." The admission hung in the air like a confession. Sarah closed her eyes, processing the reality that her husband saw vulnerable women as willing participants in his schemes. "Well," I said, straightening my cardigan, "I think we've heard enough. Sarah has filed for divorce, and Detective Morrison has already processed our criminal complaint. They're on their way." "Wait," Michael said, turning to Sarah, his voice shifting back to a desperate plea. "Sarah, think about this. We have a good life. I love you and the kids. Don't let your mother destroy our family." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. I saw the exact instant her love for him died. "You destroyed our family, Michael," she said, her voice dead calm. "You just weren't smart enough to see it." Just then, the doorbell rang. 2 uniformed police officers stood on the porch. Michael's perfect life was over. 2 days after the arrest, Detective Morrison called. "Mrs. Whitman, I need you and your daughter to come in for a follow-up. We've been in contact with authorities in Ohio and Kentucky. This is bigger than we thought." When Sarah and I arrived at the station, we were met by Detective Morrison and a new face, Detective Lisa Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit. The conference room table was covered in files, connecting Michael's crimes across multiple states. "Mrs. Whitman, Mrs. Thompson," Detective Chen began. "What you've provided has helped us connect several previously unrelated fraud investigations. Your son-in-law has been very busy." "How many others?" Sarah asked, her voice a whisper. 7 confirmed cases over the past 8 years, Morrison replied. "All follow the same pattern. He targets single mothers or widows with assets, builds long-term relationships, then executes the fraud." "The good news," Chen continued, "is that your legal protections prevented any actual financial loss, Mrs. Whitman. But more importantly, your documentation. It's the key. It gives us a clear picture of his methods that we can use to build cases for his other victims." "What about those women?" I asked. "Will they get justice?" Morrison consulted his notes. Catherine Mills, $43,000 lost. Janet Rodriguez, $67,000 in fraudulent debt. 3 other victims with similar losses. We're looking at over $200,000 in known thefts. "My God," Sarah whispered. "The pattern is always the same," Chen explained. "He gains access, establishes control, then executes the fraud just before disappearing. Your family would have been his largest single target. Your work, Mrs. Whitman, didn't just protect your family. You've provided the evidence to seek justice for all of them." As we left, Sarah was quiet. Finally, as we walked to the car, she said, "Mom, I owe you an apology. You were right from day one, and I should have listened." "Sweetheart, you wanted to believe in love," I said, repeating my earlier words. "That's not something to apologize for. The problem was him, not you." The weeks leading up to the trial were like watching dominoes fall. The investigation expanded to Florida, bringing the total to 9 victims over 12 years. The total theft was estimated at over $400,000. Patricia called me with an update that made me smile. "Eleanor, you're going to love this. Michael's previous victims have been comparing notes. They're organizing. They've formed a support group, and they're all flying in for the preliminary hearing. The prosecutors are thrilled." "How are they doing?" I asked. "Better than you'd expect," Patricia said. Catherine Mills rebuilt her savings and now volunteers for an elder fraud hotline. Janet Rodriguez went back to school and became a consumer protection advocate. They're strong, and they are determined to make sure he never hurts anyone else. On the day of the preliminary hearing, Sarah and I arrived to find an impressive gathering. An army of women, ranging in age from 32 to 71, all with the same look of determined justice I'd been wearing for months. Catherine Mills, a dignified woman in her 60s, shook my hand. "Mrs. Whitman, I want to thank you. We all knew he was a thief, but you're the one who finally caught him." Janet Rodriguez stood with her adult daughter. "That man didn't just steal my money," she said, her voice hard. "He stole my ability to trust. I'm here to make sure he pays for every family he destroyed." Looking at this group, I felt a fierce pride. He targeted us all thinking we were easy marks, isolated, embarrassed, and confused. Instead, he'd created a prosecution team of highly motivated women who had spent years documenting his crimes. Michael's hearing lasted 23 minutes. His lawyer entered a not guilty plea, but the judge, after reviewing the multi-state charges, set bail so high that Michael's face went white. As he was led back to his cell, he caught sight of our group sitting together in the front row. His look was pure, undiluted hatred. He still couldn't understand how his foolproof con had been dismantled by a group of women he'd written off as weak. "See you at trial, Michael," I called out sweetly. 2 weeks before the criminal trial, Sarah made a decision. We were in Richard's office. "I want to file a civil lawsuit," she announced, "against Michael, for fraud, emotional distress, and financial damages, not just for us. I want restitution for all his victims." Richard nodded, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "Sarah, that is an excellent strategy. A civil action could result in permanent liens against any assets he has hidden, plus future earnings garnishment. It's the perfect tool for long-term protection." The civil discovery process was fast and brutal. It uncovered assets Michael had hidden in various offshore accounts and under different names. He'd been more successful than we thought, accumulating over $200,000 in stolen funds he was saving for his retirement. "The beauty of this," Richard explained, "is that even if he serves time, these fraud judgments will follow him for the rest of his life. He will never profit from this." 3 days before the trial, Detective Morrison called. "The prosecution has built such a comprehensive case. Michael's attorney is trying to negotiate a plea. They're spooked by the civil suit and the army of victims you've assembled." "What kind of plea deal?" I asked, hoping the answer was none. 25 years in state prison," Morrison replied. "Full restitution to all victims, based on the assets your civil suit uncovered, and a permanent prohibition against him ever working in any position involving trust or financial responsibility." The prosecutor was inclined to accept. It guaranteed justice without putting the victims through a painful public trial. Sarah and I discussed it. Part of me wanted to see him cross-examined, but the practical part of me, the accountant, saw the numbers. 25 years was a life sentence for a man his age. "I think we should accept," Sarah said finally. "I don't need to hear him lie on the stand. I just want him gone from our lives, permanently." The plea hearing was on a gray Monday morning. Michael sat at the defendant's table looking deflated. His expensive suit was gone, replaced by an ill-fitting one provided by his lawyer. His charm was worthless against the documented evidence. The gallery was full. Catherine, Janet, and 5 other women sat with us. "Do you understand the charges and consequences of your plea?" the judge asked. Michael's voice was a hoarse whisper. "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you admit guilt to the charges of grand larceny, identity theft, elder fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes across multiple jurisdictions?" Michael glanced back at us. His expression was a mixture of pure defeat and simmering resentment. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge's sentencing was swift. 25 years in state prison, restitution of $437,000 to be paid to your victims from all seized assets, lifetime restrictions on financial employment. As the bailiff led Michael away in shackles, he didn't look back. His career as a professional predator was over. He would spend the next quarter century in an environment where charm and manipulation were useless currencies. 6 months later, I received a letter. It was from Catherine Mills. "Dear Eleanor," it began, "I wanted you to know that the restitution fund has been distributed to all of Michael's victims. Thanks to your civil lawsuit and the asset recovery, every woman he stole from has received full compensation for their losses." She went on to explain that the recovered money, combined with the sale of assets Michael had purchased, had fully compensated everyone. But more importantly, Catherine had used her experience to establish a non-profit organization. It was dedicated to educating older adults about financial fraud and romance scams. "Michael taught us all painful lessons," she wrote. "But we've turned those lessons into tools for protecting other families." Sarah and I were invited to the organization's first annual conference. The room was full of strong women who had refused to let one man's cruelty define them. "Mom," Sarah said as we listened to Janet Rodriguez speak about her advocacy work. "I've been thinking about what Michael said, that there are others like him and we'll never see them coming." "What about it?" "I think he's wrong," she said. "We've all learned to see the signs now. We know what to look for, and we know we're worth protecting." They asked me to speak about financial protection strategies. I stood at the podium looking out at an audience of survivors. 4 years ago, I thought I was just being a paranoid grandmother, I began. Today, I know I was acting on instincts developed over decades of watching people and recognizing patterns that didn't make sense. Trust those instincts. Predators rely on our politeness, our desire to trust, and our reluctance to seem suspicious. He taught us that careful preparation can turn the tables on even the most sophisticated con artist. That evening, I drove home to my quiet house. My financial protections were still in place, but they no longer felt like fortress walls. They felt like reasonable precautions. Michael was serving the 3rd year of his 25-year sentence. Prison records showed he was not adjusting well. Apparently, other inmates have little patience for men who prey on elderly women and single mothers. Sometimes justice comes slowly, but when it finally arrives, it's worth the wait. I raised my evening tea in a quiet toast to the woman I'd become, to the choices that had protected my family, and to the knowledge that some grandmothers are far more dangerous than they appear. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.